I don't hide the fact that I hate Christmas. Call me a provincial Scrooge, insult me to no end. But every year, I feel a dread greater than anyone who hates the holiday season could ever claim. If you know me personally, you assume that it's because of my younger brother's disappearance, and you'd be right for the most part. It happened on one Christmas morning when all by rights of those two of us should have been sitting there by our tree opening presents and making treasured childhood memories. Instead, I was treated with a day of police frantically searching our house and neighborhood while questioning my distraught parents. They questioned me too, of course, but as a 10-year-old girl, I didn't really have that much to say. I told them that I had just gone to bed, excited for what the new day had in store for us. And that was the last I saw of him. He never just came down to open his gifts. That's when my mother discovered his room was empty. But that was a lie. I do know what happened to Chris. I know what took him away. And I know what that if I told you the truth, but no one would believe in me, then or now. Santa kidnapped my brother. Please don't laugh. I know it sounds... You're right, and you're right. It's ridiculous. He can't be real. And even if he was, he's supposed to be nice to children. But I know what I saw, and that it wasn't some lunatic in a Santa suit either. That man was as real as a winter wind that sends you chills down to the bone. I suppose I should start by telling you of how all this started. Before the holiday was ruined but for my family, that Christmas Eve we all left out our cookies for Santa, talked about what we hoped to bring, and then our parents would read the night before Christmas to my brother and I, all of them cheerful, mundane, and traditions for our family. That was different than the final year. I was noticeably less enthusiastic about the whole process. It was the first year I had openly stopped believing in Santa Claus. I was a strange, cynical child, much to the concern of my parents. To tell you the truth, until that fateful night, I never really had been a believer in Santa Claus. I just mostly played along to please the adults. But that year, I was tired of all the same acting. That's one of the many ways that we differed so much. My brother and I, you see. Chris was a young, energetic, and curious boy. I remember the year he was taken to the one where he had found where our parents were hiding our unwrapped gifts weeks ahead of time. He refused to tell his own big sister what he was going to be getting, though. Figures, I guess. More importantly, however, being 3 years younger than me, he was still very much a believer. My flat denials of existence of Santa Claus only served as a challenge for him, and he was determined to prove otherwise. We were heading up the stairs to bed when he got my attention. "Stay up with me," he said as he tugged my pajama sleeve. "I'll show you he's real. We'll catch him in the act. I bet we'll be the first ones to ever done it, and I'm sure he'll give us all kinds of stuff for when we do." I sighed. "I'd rather just get some sleep, Chris," I told him. "You can go on believing if you want, but I don't have just to have a good Christmas." I always tried to avoid being such a damper on his spirit, and I thought convincing him to forget about his harebrained schemes would be much better than waiting up half the night just to see his disappointment. "Oh, come on, sis," he cried. "Do I always make you have fun? If it weren't for me, you'd turn into a boring old lady just like Miss Henderson." I must have made a disgusted face, because Chris laughed, a mischievous grin, and said, "Well, what is it going to be, Miss Henderson? Are we going to catch Santa in the act or not?" Miss Henderson was my fourth-grade teacher, and I despised that old crone with a passion. Chris knew how to push my buttons. "All right, short stuff, you're on," I said, with more bravado than I actually felt. First to sleep, all has to wait till New Year's to open their gift from Santa. Chris' eyes flashed with excitement and swagger. "I'll take that bet." So we went to our rooms, wait for our parents to go turn to bed. After all the lights went out, I waited about half an hour just to make sure they were asleep. I crept out of my bed and sneaked downstairs. The way they were, light was on the living room. Chris was sitting casually near the fireplace. "What took you so long?" he said. Always the confident one. "I waited for Mom and Dad to get to sleep, idiot," I replied. "They're not going to be happy if they find us here." With an unceremonious plop, I sat down on the couch directly in front of the fireplace. "So how do you expect to stay up the entire night?" I asked. "I imagine I'll figure it out," Chris said. I'm not sure how long we waited down there for the so-called Saint Nick to appear, but Chris almost looked ready to doze off when we heard shocked awake by something that must have been large and heavy hitting the roof. After a short pause, there was a sound of shuffling and scraping of feet. I was for sure we had the ringing of little bells. "Oh, man," Chris whispered in awe. "It's really him." For a moment I wondered why Mom and Dad weren't awoken by all this. All this racket was enough to wake the dead. But that train of thought stopped when the chimney soot started sprinkling down the fireplace. Chris dashed over to me and shook my shoulders. "What did I tell you? He's real! He's real!" Unlike Chris, I didn't think there was any supernatural explanation behind this strange occurrence. I was convinced that it was a burglar trying to find their way through the unconventional means. I sat stiffly, staring at the fireplace for a few moments, unsure of what to do, until I rose and divided underneath the couch to hide. "What are you doing?" Chris cried in bewilderment. "He's coming!" "Get down!" I whispered fiercely at him. "We don't know who he really is." Chris opened his mouth to protest, but a voice let out a grunt from the chimney, and it spooked him enough to find him a spot of his own. He hid behind his dad's large lever-tongue lounge chair in the corner. A few moments later, a final loud thump came, and the sound of the front of the fireplace was obscured by all the soot rushing out to the air. I covered my mouth and nose, trying desperately to prevent myself from coughing. When it was finally settled, the sight of my cynical mind gave a serious shock. The old man that stood before me was really someone dressed as Santa Claus. He looked very inch in his part. His body was the perfect size. He had the long white beard. His outfit was beautifully made of red jacket and pants. His face contained the soft, loving features of an old man enjoying the moment. What surprised me the most about this stranger man was, even though he had just entered through our musty chimney, there wasn't even a single speck of soot in him. It was almost as if nothing could mar his perfect appearance, was naturally repelled. I was finally convinced that he was a real deal of what to become next. Throwing the sack of presents over his shoulder, Santa stepped away from the fireplace, and a short elf girl emerged to follow him. The elf had pointed ears, glistening green suit, and was so short that she only came up to Santa's knee. Unlike the jolly old man, she seemed terrified to take a single step into our home. She looked around as if she was some terrible threat in the room, and seemingly only slightly relieved when she mistaken it was empty. Santa noticed her fear, but rather than reassure her that would be expected, for a fraction of a second, his kind face turned Dad into a pure, horrifying malice. It was like the kind of old man had been replaced by an insane, merciless master, only to return a nanosecond later. The elf's moves changed into a dime. In short order, she was filling our stockings with small toys and candy, with a smile plastered onto her face that seemed to be really ready to crack at any moment. Being so short, she had used some kind of magic to levitate so she can get within reach. With a purposeful yet quiet footsteps, Santa made his way over to our tree, taking 2 presents from his bag, and he placed them in the proper spot and went to where he had left his traditional sack. The elf was done with her job too, but Santa wasn't inclined to share with his companion. Now that she was toeing the line, he barely even acknowledged her presence. She just stood there next to him, waiting for him to finish, wringing her hands in nervous movements. On his face was the whole scene like something ripped out straight from a Christmas television special. But at my young age, I could tell that something more was going on, and when I'm about to say it seemed like they were attempting to appear whimsical for whimsy's sake. Like it was all one big act that they were putting on. The little elf barely passed a convincing actress, and Santa's momentarily lapse only sentimented by suspicions. It was something that I was unable to articulate fully at the time, but I can now. It looked like a ruse. Chris then fell for it straight away. He must have been too young to notice the sinister signs that I had been able to pick up on. From my angle on the floor, I could see him clearly in his own hind spot. The face on and look, it told me everything I needed to know. He was completely enamored with those two people. To my horror, he slowly crept up from behind the chair. I wanted to call out to him, try to tell him to stay where he was, that those two were strangers, but there was no way to tell what would have happened once they know we were there. But that would have given us both away. It's not like he wouldn't have listened to me ever. How many kids out there can't help but trust Santa Claus? Wow, he whispered to the bizarre intruders. It's really you. At this, both Santa and his elf turned to see Chris, standing in the middle of the room. Both of his had this fucked expression of surprise that's only served to unsettle me even further. Weighing up for us, I see, Santa commented with a warm smile. Yeah, Chris said cheerfully. I wanted to prove that you're really real and everything. And it seems like you have, Santa replied with a chuckle. He sat down in my father's chair and motioned for Chris to sit with him, to which he obliged. Oh man, I've got so many questions, Chris exclaimed. Are the reindeer on the roof? Can I see them? What is it like living at the North Pole? Oh, I wish I could see it someday. All in good time, Santa said, grinning at his remark. Maybe someone would have looked at it as a friendly expression, but to me that smile, what seemed to be contained in self-satisfaction of a winning game. As for the elf, she had lost all of her color in her face. She made no move whatsoever as the two sat together, but her expression was enough to tell me that something horrible was about to happen. I knew you were real. I just knew it, Chris said. And all the big kids at school give us such a hard time about it. Even Sis was losing it too. Just wait till everyone else hears about this. They won't, Chris, Santa said, clasping a gloved hand over my brother's shoulder. Huh? Why not? He asked in confused. Do I have to keep it a secret? Santa let out a laugh, deep and evil laugh that was much like his fabled ho ho ho. Do you honestly think that you've been the only one to ever see me? That throughout history, the many of little children in the world haven't done the same thing as you. Chris shifted uncomfortably in the man's lap. I guess not. You see, Chris, Santa began, children are not to be trusted. They are ignorant, greedy, and selfish offspring of humans, a greedy, selfish race to begin with. Over the years, I've been able to sustain myself on these human qualities, and humans have happily whitewashed my persona in order to state their desires without guilt. It's a perfect season for it. Don't you agree, my dear boy? The excitement in Chris's face was all but gone now. He was finally starting to get it. The children who seek me out always want something, Santa said. More meaningless possessions, satisfaction of curiosity, or simple proof that there were only a few examples. However, there was always a price to be paid for breaking the rules and finding something that was not meant to be found. Throughout this conversation, the elf began to gather the gifts that they had brought with a hint of reluctance. She even managed to take the cookies Santa had magically reappeared. She was ridding on the house of any evidence of their presence. Santa's hands squeezed Chris's shoulders tightly. I'm always looking for more helpers, he continued. Children who have seen me, who can never keep such a secret, are the perfect candidates. My brother's face turned to an expression of absolute fear. Now he realized his fatal error. You are not the first, he said, and you certainly won't be the last. Turning to his elf, Santa barked a command. Annabelle, it's time to change him now. No, please, the elf stammered. Please don't make me. Santa gave her a cruel look of disdain and waved his hand towards her in an odd way. I was horrified to see the elf suddenly start clawing frantically at her face, digging her nails into her own skin. She screeched in pain, unable to stop harming herself. Santa waved his hand again, releasing her from the torture. Her face was now covered in scratches and dripping with blood. Chris screamed and dove off Santa's lap, trying to rush out the room, but the old man made another strange wave, and his hand made Chris stop in his tracks, as if possessed. My brother turned around and faced him, his eyes wide with fear, and he was under that awful man's control. Don't you see? It's too late for you now, he said triumphantly. Accept your fate. With a smug grin, Santa looked at his companion. I should really start having you wear all red, he said in a mocking tone. At least then the blood won't be showing much. Are you going to do as you're told now, Annabelle? Or do I have to think of something worse for you? The elf let out a heavy sob and looked up at a terrified brother. I'm sorry, she said in a sad, high-pitched voice. From where I was, I could see her tears mingling with blood as she took a little shiver of her wand hidden within the folds of her clothes. She pointed directly at my brother, and a blinding flash filled the room. It took me time for my sight to recover, but when I did, I saw that Chris I knew disappearing before me. His whole body looked like it was melting before my eyes, unnecessary flesh following and reshaping itself. When the transformation was over, he was shorter and squatter. His ears came out sharp points too. His nose was round and the flesh as if he'd been in the cold. Even his clothes had changed into a uniform, similar to Santa's companion, only red this time. His new elf appearance was a secretary of his former self. He must have been so scared looking down at his new form, he can only let out a painful squeak. So I was. I lay frozen underneath the couch, clutching the carpet, as that awful obese man and that strange, crying elf dragged my newly turned brother into the fireplace. Chris then looked down and stared directly at me. His expression was a cry for help. But what could I do? How could I fight two magical beings without getting myself into this horrible situation? So I did nothing, and I still have nightmares about that. With Chris in tow, they shot up in the chimney all together with their strange magic, and that was the last I ever saw of my little brother. Almost the entire night I stayed under the couch, softly crying. In my state of shock, I had no strength to do much else. But as I saw the sun slowly rise from the windows, I knew it was safe to crawl out from my hiding place and find my way back to my room. The rest, I guess, is history. To this day, I won't have anything to do with this horrible holiday. I don't decorate, don't give out gifts, I don't go to parties, I don't live in a house with a chimney or a fireplace. Hell, I refuse to even visit the houses that with one of this time of year. Don't get me started about the mall or street corner Santas. I just keep my apartment as much as I can. In my paranoia, I really just turn on a cheerless shut and mouth elf off out of the year because I know that somewhere in the world will always be more unlucky children going missing. Still, I don't know why I didn't meet the same fate as my brother. Has he ever told his captors that I was there too? Could he really kept a secret for that long? Could they somehow pry the truth out of him? Every year since that night, I've been terrified that they'll finally come for me. Perhaps what keeps me safe is the fact I stayed quiet all these years, never telling anyone what really happened. I can only assume that Chris had done the same. Anyone out there must be wondering why I'd say anything about it now. To be honest, I want to because I'm not sure if that fat bastard could do to me. I mean, there's no way he could turn a fully grown adult into an elf, right? But most of all, I want to know what became of Chris. It hurts to me to think of what really happened to him over these years, and I need to find out. Maybe if I shared my story with the world, somebody out there will give me answers. Maybe there's some way I could help him. I'm willing to take the risk. I just hope all the disturbing possibilities I've imagined won't come to pass. Christmas Eve is coming. Wish me luck.